everyone. My name is Kayla Tychsen, and I am your conscious parent coach. And today I'm going live with a measured mom. So let's invite her to join. Reading. So this month, for the month of July, I'm hosting the Summer Literacy Challenge. Hi, Anna. How are you?
Good. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yeah, thanks so much for joining me. I know that you just got back from traveling, I think. So I
This is
really, I really appreciate you taking the time. It means a lot. Yeah, for starters, we'd love to know a little bit more about you and your background and what it is that you do, and then we can jump in.
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me. My name is Anna Geiger, and I've been blogging at The Measured Mom since 2013 when my oldest was 5, and she had 3 little brothers, and now that daughter is going off to school, to college this fall, so time flies.
Congratulations!
Thank you. Yeah, it's crazy. So, yeah, she's going to be a teacher, so she's getting ready to to send off, so that's exciting. And then we have 5 more after her, so 3 boys in a row, and then a girl and then a boy. So our youngest is going to be in 4th grade, and then it goes up from there. And so when I started my website, I was basically just looking for a way to have an outlet for myself because I was pretty overwhelmed with 4 little kids at once. And so I called it the Measured Mom because it was basically an encouragement to me to be more patient, measured, thoughtful. I was really struggling, still struggle with those things. However, when I got started, and a few months into it, I realized I really didn't want to write about parenting. I wanted to write about teaching. So I do mention things about parenting because that is obviously a huge part of my life, but it's focused more on the teaching part of it. I've not been in the classroom for a while, but I was a teacher for quite a while before my oldest was born, and was very much a balanced literacy teacher, which we'll talk about what that means. And then about 5 years ago or so, I had an awakening where I learned that much of what I thought was true about how reading works was not. And so that's really what I've been focused on for like the last 5 years or so, is really educating teachers and parents, but primarily teachers, about how we should be teaching reading and sharing resources for that. I published a book last summer. I'm going to be starting a PhD program this fall, and then I continue to share things on my website and on social media.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And yeah, I'm looking forward to diving into this with you because I'm sure that there's so many people that are looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So we can just jump right in. What is this term, the science of reading?
Yeah, so the phrase the science of reading is somewhat new. I don't know how recent, in the last 10 years, but it's just a body of research about teaching reading. So that's the science of reading, even by different names, has been around for a long, long time, decades. But basically all it is the body of research about how to teach reading, how we learn to read and how to teach reading, and what specific practices are most effective. And we modify how we teach based on what we learn, or that's the idea. So the science of reading 50 years ago was different from the science of reading today, obviously, because we've had lots more studies. But the problem is that many schools and teachers aren't teaching reading in line with what the research tells us is best practice.
Okay. And are there any specific ways that you see that playing out that you could share with us?
Yeah, well, I can talk to you a little bit about the fads in education, which I was certainly fell prey to for many years. Um, you know, the we know from research that starting with the foundation of phonemic awareness and phonics instruction, which I'll talk about in a little bit, is the way to get started. It does not mean phonics is the only thing, but it is the foundation of reading. However, over the decades, different people have felt like that was boring or that was not the most effective way to teach reading. And so different people have tried to do different things. And this started way back in the 1800s. There was a superintendent, or I'm not sure if he was a superintendent, but some guy in a board of education out in Massachusetts, Horace Mann, basically said that letters were, I think he called them bloodless, ghostly apparitions. Like they were just really boring, really random, like, or soulless. Like, let's not teach kids about letters and sounds. Let's make reading joyful. And so he was an advocate for the whole word method, where you teach kids to memorize whole words instead of learning how the sounds match up. And that lasted for a long time in a lot of schools. My mom was a victim of that back in the 60s. And unfortunately, she really struggled to learn to read, still struggles to spell. And she always says, I didn't really learn to read very well until I read to you guys. when she was in her early 20s when we started being born. So, yeah, very sad. A lot of people suffered from that. And then another one was whole language, which was popular, began being known about in the 70s and then popular in the 80s and even through the 90s and even in some schools today, although that's not as common. And whole language is this idea that if you just surround kids with a lot of books and read to them a lot, and they will learn to read, they'll pick it up, because this theory is that learning to read is as natural as learning to speak. It is not, though. It is not. But that's what many people think. That's what I was taught in some places. And so we just think if we make our classrooms these beautiful literacy rich worlds, and we read to our students and their parents read to them at home, then this will come together. And then after that, we found out, well, that's actually not true. There was this big debate between whole language and phonics, which has been there all along, but in different places, not always taught very much. In the early 2000s, there was this attempt to be kind of a let's do a compromise between whole language and phonics, and we'll call it balanced literacy. So we'll definitely do lots of this work with books, but we'll also teach phonics. The problem is the things were not integrated well enough, and anyway, that's another whole nother story. But that's the history. And then what's happened in the year late 2000.
Oh, okay. Oh, I think maybe it was my
Okay.
internet. Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Okay, yeah.
Yes, good. Okay. And so then in the 2010s, Emily Hanford is a journalist, and she called attention to a lot of this through her reporting. A lot of people have heard of Sold a Story, which was the podcast series that came out more recently. But these articles and the Sold a Story basically shed a light on the problems with balanced literacy. And so it got a lot of people's attention. And then especially in 2020, when schools were closed, that's when a lot of this took root or got people's attention. A lot of teachers were home. They had more time to do some professional reading, and it just kind of exploded through social media. So the science of reading has been around forever, just by different names, but the research has been there. But people becoming aware that many balanced literacy practices that they had were actually not backed by research is pretty recent for most people. Now, I have a podcast and I interview people all the time, and some people have known about this for decades. Many people like me, though, believe the balanced literacy myths, and because we were taught that in college and graduate school, and so it made sense to us. All the professional books we were taught reading that way. But a lot of people now are rethinking how they teach reading. And it's not to say that if you were a balanced literacy teacher, you did everything wrong. That's definitely not true. But there's some key things that were problems that we're working on fixing. Does that help?
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I think maybe some of where I've seen this play out and kind of where this divide happens in the homeschool world is maybe with like the unschoolers, and then other more other methodologies. But I have heard this notion kind of in this unschooler world, kind of those same ideas that you just read to your child every day and they'll start picking up the words. And I think it's probably more nuanced than that. It's probably just one extreme
Mm-hmm.
perspective. I don't necessarily think every unschooler thinks that, but yeah, it's helpful to hear that there is really science behind the way our brains learn, the way our brains learn to read in particular, because obviously that is very different to the way our brains learn to do other things, that might come more naturally, like walking, talking, some of these more
Yes.
development milestones. So I guess a lot of my audience are parents. And so, as a teacher, as someone who supports teachers, I think some of my audience, they are homeschooling parents, but some are just parents that want to, support their kids on their reading journey. What are some ways that parents can support the science of reading at home? Maybe if their child isn't in school yet, and then maybe, if they are in school, maybe they're in kindergarten or first grade, what can they be doing to support that?
Yeah. So first of all, just say, because some people get confused by this, I don't homeschool. So just in case anyone is wondering about that, I did teach all my kids to read before they went to school because I wanted to do that. But I did teach my oldest five the balanced literacy way with phonics mixed in, like enough. And I don't, it all worked because balanced literacy can work for about 40% of kids, FYI. The problem is it doesn't work for a lot of kids, and the greatest number. And if kids have problems with dyslexia, balanced literacy is not going to work. And dyslexia is like, some people say up to 20% of the population and different ranges, mild to severe. So it's
So
not a good way to teach.
actually, can I pause you there because I'm curious. Um, just and I don't know how long this would take to go into, but obviously it is important to surround our kids with lots of like language rich environment and read books to them. So where is the difference between, a phonics based approach that's rooted in science and, a literacy rich environment where you're reading all the time, and from this actual balanced literacy approach that doesn't necessarily work?
Good question. So I'll just bring up some key differences that parents might see, especially if their kids are in school, but maybe in some reading materials that you might be finding if you're homeschooling. So first of all, whole language is basically just reads them a lot and they'll pick it up. Now, the fact is some kids actually do. It's a super tiny number. It's like 5%. And it's not that they don't need phonics, it's that they teach themselves phonics, basically. Okay, but we shouldn't count on that, all right? And plus, all kids benefit from instruction in decoding and spelling in particular, right? So it is, some people will say, well, my kid learned to read without me even teaching them. So it's just to know that that can happen. It's just very rare, okay? So the balanced literacy way is reading a lot to kids, which is very important. We want to do that no matter what. Research strongly backs that up, but for different reasons than balanced literacy might say, or whole language. And then we also want to talk about what they're reading. That's all important. But the problem with the balanced literacy approach for beginning readers, okay, so kids just starting to read, and I taught first grade and second grade, so I did this. It's giving kids, when you're first teaching them, these pattern books, and then they kind of figure out the pattern, and then they kind of guess on the last word. You never say guess if you're the balanced literacy teacher, but that's technically what it is, using like the first letter. So the book might be something really basic, like at the zoo, and it would say, I see a gorilla, I see a lion, I see a tiger, and they're memorizing the pattern. And some kids will learn those words from seeing them over and over. They're memorizing them as wholes mostly, like the word see. They might not know E says E, but they're just kind of memorizing it. And then they use the picture and the context to figure out that last word, right? So they've been taught letter sounds. They know L, U, U. They probably couldn't read Lion by itself, but there's the picture, lion, perfect. So to the teacher, and I'm talking about myself, it's like, wow, they're really fluent. They're just going right through it. They sound so good. It's basically teaching them to sound like real readers without really teaching them the nuts and bolts of reading, or not enough. So you are still teaching phonics a lot of times in balanced literacy, but then you're giving them this practice material that doesn't really let them practice it, right? You're basically teaching them to kind of start the word and then kind of just garble their way through it using the picture instead of actually sounding out all the letters. And it seems like it's working for a lot of those teachers, like it did for me, because we don't see them when they're in third grade, and all of a sudden the pictures go away, the words are longer. We haven't necessarily given them the how to get through these longer words, but we think we're doing the right thing because they sound fluent and they're comprehending. Because if you can get through it really fast like that, you know what it's about. On the other hand, if you're using decodable text, which includes patterns they've been taught, which it seems very boring for us as adults, right, to start. So like, I am Sam. Sam, just very slow, and they're just doing it really slowly, like Sam. Like they have to go really slow. Versus the pattern books, it's just so much nicer to listen to. They're just breezing right through it, and so that is the problem. That it's fake fluency is what I call it in my book. It's fake fluency. It seems like it's fluency, but fluency starts at the letter, sound, and word level. And if they're not reading those words in isolation, they're not really reading, which I would not have believed if somebody told me that, but it's the unfortunate truth. Now, can some kids learn to read that way? Yes, because as you teach them phonics, they start to apply it to the words and all sorts starts to come together. That works for a lot of kids. And some teachers, balanced literacy teachers, are intuitive enough to say, well, I think we need more phonics instruction on this because they're not getting it. So it's not that they're not teaching phonics, it's not systematic. They're probably not following the scope and sequence or sticking to that or giving a lot of review or practice. The practice is in these leveled pattern books. And the other big thing, there's many things, but the other big problem with balanced literacy at the beginning is memorizing words. So a lot of times, and unfortunately, schools are giving these mandates, or I don't know if that's the word, but expectation that they're supposed to have their kindergartners learn like 100 sight words, right? And the sight words are, teachers have been taught that sight words are words that you can't sound out. So you just have to memorize how it looks. And so they're just drilling with flashcards. And then after a certain period of time, you think the kids have learned like, 30 words, then they start to forget the ones you taught at the beginning because their memory, they only have so much capacity for memorizing images. Whereas if you would actually break the words down and teach them how the sounds map onto the letters, they can do something called orthographic mapping where they actually know the word. So like for you, you look at a word on a sign, like no walking on the grass. You look at it and you can't help it. You've read it instantly. You can't not read it. That's where we're trying to get our students to go. But they don't get there by memorizing words by shapes. They get there by practicing sounding out words until it's mapped. Does that help?
Yeah, that's so helpful. Thank you so much for explaining that. Okay, so back to my initial question about parents. Maybe they're homeschool parents, maybe they're not. And it would obviously look different if they were homeschool parents. But how can parents support the science of reading at home?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk just now in general to parents in general, just because with homeschooling you hopefully have a program. But if you're just trying to support your kids, or you have time with them, they may or may not go to preschool. I did not send my kids to preschool because I wanted this extra time to teach them this stuff, and because I had so many babies, I just couldn't handle the preschool drive. I just wasn't ready to do that. But the one thing always is read to them. It's just that is not going to teach them to read, most likely, right? Unless they're like this very tiny percent. But reading to them is so important for many, many, many reasons. But a big one is vocabulary, because not every word can be phonetically sounded out. Many words cannot because of the schwa, right? So if you think of the word cactus, if they sounded it out perfectly phonetically, it's cactus, which is not a word. They have to flex that vowel to get to cactus. But how do they know that there's such a thing as a cactus unless they've heard of it, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't know. It's just cactus. So the more you read to them and talk to them about the books you're reading, the more you get these words into their oral vocabulary. And they need those words in their oral vocabulary to read them when the words aren't 100% phonetic. Also, comprehension can be improved by, we call it language comprehension. So that if they understand a text to them, that's a really important piece of the puzzle for learning to read. There's a famous equation in the world of the science of reading called the simple view of reading, and it says word recognition, which means being able to read the words in isolation, sound them out, times language comprehension, which means understanding the text if it's read to you, equals reading comprehension. So they can read, they can decode the words all day long, but if they don't understand them, they don't have reading comprehension, right? So it's not just phonics. That's the whole point. So reading to them, and there's research really supports something called dialogic reading, which is, I'm sure, what a lot of parents are already doing. And that is having a conversation as you read the book. So don't think conversation, not quiz. Conversation, not quiz. So you stop every now and then, you talk about the book, you talk about the pictures. If you have a child who loves being read to, they are leading the way on this, right? They are doing it already. But some kids, that might not be their favorite thing. I think it's a blessing for me that when my kids were very little, there weren't as many screens. I know, and time has flown. It's not that long ago, but I just think things have changed so much just in the last few years. And so that wasn't such of a temptation for me to have them be using iPads and things all the time. We mostly just had to think about TV, and we put it in the basement, so I didn't have to think about it very much. But nowadays, parents really have to be very intentional, and that's not easy because we all have our screens that we like. I mean, I'm same as anybody else. So we have to be intentional. I think if kids can choose between a book and a screen, I think they're mostly going to choose a screen. So we have to put the limits on that and boundaries so that reading time is fun and something we both make time for. So reading aloud to them, I have dozens and dozens of book lists on my website from when I read to my kids when they were little. So these are all kid approved web lists. I don't make them anymore because I don't read to them as much anymore, but they're all there. And then also teaching them letters and sounds, I think, is really important. I think we can just let go of this thing that floats around on social media that if you teach your kid letters and sounds when they're little, that you're taking away playtime or that you're ruining their childhood. I don't know where this came from, but people have this idea that you can't teach your child to read and let them have a childhood. It only takes a short amount of time per day, literally. I mean, you could teach them their letters and sounds in 10 minutes a day, not even every day of the week, depending on the child, of course, but some kids will pick it up so quickly. So don't be afraid to teach letters and sounds. And I would encourage parents to teach sounds with the letters, even if they don't retain them, do them both at the same time. So it makes sense if you're just doing this at home informally to start with letters of their name, like the first letter of their name. And then the letters that are easy to recognize, like O, kids can remember O pretty easily. Other letters that they just see and remember versus some of the harder ones like R, or the ones that are matching up to other ones very closely are hard. But like S, there's nothing else quite like S. I remember teaching letters, and then I remember so he's 15 now, but I remember when his first letter was E. I taught E because it was an easy one to make with like sticks or something. And then we were in an elevator and he pointed out the E, and I was just so excited. So teach letters, but then point them out wherever you go. We were just on a family vacation, and I was saying, one thing I missed was like whenever we would go places, I was always looking for CVC words on signs, like bus. And I always had at least one kid who was learning to read, and I'd say, "Oh, read that word." And now there's nobody. There's nobody now. They're all very fluent readers. But once you start teaching that stuff, find it in the world, and then have them say it or try it. Then also like building letters, you can do that with toys. You can do that with utensils. You can do it with food. You can draw in the sand. Wherever you are, just be thinking about how can I just put that in here now, just for fun. And then I think having them practice writing letters is good, but I also know that from my own experience, when they're very little, they're not holding a pencil correctly, and that's hard. And I don't have an answer for that exactly. Like, when do you transition to expectations in terms of holding it properly? But I did give an interview with Sean Datchick at the Iowa Reading Research Center, or I think it's the Research Center. I'm not sure reading research, but he's a professor there. And he said that the research on this has pretty much been done the year before kindergarten. So like we're talking like 4 years old, you can teach kids to try to hold a pencil properly and form letters. And I would, if I could go back in time, I would have tried to help my kids form the letters properly from the beginning. And not that I would stop them from making letters on their own, but I would have talked about that a little bit more. Part of my issue was I had so many children at once, and so I didn't really have the bandwidth always to like stand next to them and make sure they were doing that. I don't think you should be militant about it at all, but I think you should show them that, especially when they start to write their name. Try to help them form the letters properly from the beginning as much as possible. And then also to build phonemic awareness into daily conversation. So phonemic awareness is just this ability to blend sounds into words and take words apart into sounds. So if you have the word cat, phonemic awareness has to do with taking it apart into k, at. And then if you're at the dinner, you might say, could someone pass me the I, o, k? And then if they put it together, that's phoneme blending. So you can do that in the car, you can do that at dinner, you can do that when you're playing. You can make it easier. Instead of taking every single sound apart, you can just take the first and the end. So you could say, can you give me the toy ish? That's called the onset rhyme. Like, just break the word apart and have kids put it together. Just an everyday play is really good. And then, like I said, teach those letters and sounds, read to them a lot. There's a lot more we can do, but I think those are kind of starting points. Oh, and then also read nursery rhymes to kids and rhyming books. Rhyming is not like an important skill for being able to read, but it helps kids to play with language. It's fun, and it does come in handy later on. And also, if kids struggle with rhyming, it's actually a sign that reading might be hard, and that's kind of a red flag and kind of a sign that you need to be working on some other things.
Interesting. That's really interesting to know. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing. And just to come back to a point you made earlier, this idea that teaching some of these things like letter sounds or, the letter names, pointing letters out, making letters in the dirt, that those things aren't fun to kids. Like, kids love that stuff. And it's also, and I'm sure you experienced this when you were in the car and, seeing a CBC word on a sign, and they were able to sound it out in, see a word in real life and be able to read it, or, see the E on the elevator. Like, those kinds of things are so confidence building for kids. And it really is fun, and it really can be fun. It's obviously not fun if we're drilling them and thinking we need to do flashcards, or we need to make sure our 2-year-old knows all their letters, or 3-year-old knows all their letters, or whatever it might be. But yeah, just this idea of playing, and as we're out and about, pointing these things out, inviting them into these things, using these like everyday interactions to build this awareness, I think is what, some of the things that you're saying. And really, these things can, and I would argue, like, are really fun for kids. They do really enjoy it.
I think people need to let go of this idea that teaching young kids their letters and sounds and even teaching preschoolers to read is developmentally inappropriate. What could be developmentally inappropriate is the tools or the methods you're using, because you're not going to want, like, I mean, all kids are different, okay? But my oldest had, even though she really didn't talk until she was 2.5, like she literally didn't talk. She didn't even call me mom. She knew all her letters and sounds. Like she could point them out if I named them and she could say the sounds. She was learning those when she was 1 year old. That we were just playing. I didn't do flashcards. I didn't do worksheets. Um, versus someone who's 4 and going into kindergarten, they might enjoy some worksheets. You really have to feel out your child and just be thoughtful about what you're doing.
Yeah, that's so helpful. Thanks so much. Um, okay, so we I had a few other questions, but I want to keep this at about 30 minutes.
Okay.
So I guess one question for you, what if a child seems resistant to reading or to some of these types of activities? What would say to that parent? How can a parent support that motivation without um, putting that extra pressure and stress on their child?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think first I want to say, like, I've seen people in Facebook groups. My child is 5, going into kindergarten. I still don't know any letters. I'm really worried. I've tried to teach them. They don't understand. And someone else will say, just let them play. They're only 5. And to that, I want to say it's actually a warning sign if you're trying to teach that around that age and they're not picking anything up. That doesn't mean you have to be really worried, but it does mean you shouldn't just give up because someone on Facebook told you they're a kid, let them play. Okay. That is a warning sign. And you can look up signs of dyslexia in preschool and you will find them. Okay. So I'm not saying that means you have to be scared and worried. Kids with dyslexia can totally learn to read, but we don't want to ignore that. We don't want to ignore red flags. We want to do something about it. That said, if it's hard for them, it's not going to be as fun for them, right? Now, if they don't like it, that doesn't mean they have dyslexia. But here are some things that I recommend. Number one, limit screens. Nobody wants to hear that. That's so hard. I totally get that. It is a very different world than it was for me 15 years ago when I first started having preschoolers. It's very hard, but you have to be intentional, and that's probably for the parent too. And I also understand how hard that is. But having periods of time where you don't have a phone with you or your child, where a screen is just not an option, okay? Because that's way more fun and entertaining than doing something else. So we have to consciously limit that. Number two is try to have a consistent time that you do this. I think in my own experience, when kids knew what to expect and it wasn't like a random mom pulling something out, well, I was doing this, I don't want to do that right now. If there's an expectation that we do it this time, and it's hopefully an ideal time for mother and or father and child, right? So, not necessarily, right at bedtime or something, like pick a time that you're both at your best. Hopefully, I totally get how every day is different, but if you build an expectation, and maybe it's right after lunch, maybe we just put lunch away, or maybe it's right before lunch, I don't know. But we're just going to do 10 minutes, and maybe you have a little box of stuff and you get it out and you get all excited. I think consistency is important. And then vary what you're doing, right? So one thing that I would do with my kids when I was teaching them to learn their letters is I'd write them on sticky notes and we'd hide them around the living room, and I would say, find them and bring them to me. And even if we were just learning one letter, it was just the E. Bring me all the E's. They didn't know a letter from a circle, but that was all that was on the notes. So we'd bring me all the E's, and eventually we do E's and S's. Okay, put the E's here and the S's here. That's very simple and playful, and you can do that for 5 minutes, and you've done something. So I think that's what I would encourage parents to do.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And yeah, as hard as it is, um, with screens being such a huge part of our lives now, it is so important because if our kids are used to being constantly entertained and maybe not developing that frustration tolerance, I
Yeah.
think that's really where we can see this, resistance to doing things that are a little bit more challenging, that do take a little bit more effort. So, yeah, I really appreciate what you said. I think that is really important, having times where we're putting our phone away and modeling that, and where it's not an option, and we even if it's I think it should be even during other times besides this, set
Right,
aside
exactly.
time for reading activities, right? They should have other time of free play without screens because that's when they're going to practice some of these skills, like boredom and being able to be creative, problem solve, yeah, without a screen. So, um, yeah. So tell us how we can follow you. Tell us where we can find your book. Tell us a little bit more about how we can, benefit from your resources.
Yeah, so I'm on themeasuredmom.com and I have people can email me or my team at hello@themeasuredmom.com. If it's for me, it'll get to me. Um, and then I have on my blog an old series about teaching the alphabet. If you just Google how to teach the alphabet to preschoolers measured mom, it'll come up. I do have a preschool alphabet curriculum that a lot of people use. Um, I also have over 700, I think, freebies on the website over all the years. So if you go to my website and just go to the top, themeasuredmom.com, and go to the top and you'll say freebies. Just click on that and you'll find alphabet or any other skill and just click on it and then you'll just get lost hopefully in the rabbit hole of freebies. So I would do that. I would start there with the freebies and then certainly people can email me anytime. And then the book is really for, I would say, K through third grade primarily, teachers or homeschoolers, and you can find it on Amazon or anywhere people sell books. It's called Reach All Readers. Yeah, those would be the main things.
Okay, thank you so much for your time, Anna. We really appreciate just all your wisdom and knowledge. And for everyone listening, go find Anna at her website, themeasuredmom.com. Follow her on Instagram. And it's also not too late to join the Summer Literacy Challenge that I'm hosting for the month of July. So if you want connection-based literacy activities that you can do at home with your child, on the go, in the car, go ahead and click the link in my bio and you can find the link to sign up. And I've also partnered with Love Every for a reading skill set giveaway. So I hope to see you all there. And again, a big thanks to Anna. I am just seeing one question about limiting screen time. And Amira, go ahead and message me, DM me, and we can talk uh, through DMs about that. I think it's a really, really great question, a really important question. And maybe I'll also answer that on my feed as well. So again, thank you so much, Anna. We really appreciate you taking time today.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.